What's going on, everyone? Welcome to the Wednesday, July 5th edition of the MLB Sims video. I'm your host, Adam Scherer. You can follow me on Twitter at ShipMyMoneyDFS. And we have close to a full MLB slate tonight, 12 games, I believe, on tap on the main slate on DraftKings. And we're going to walk through the MLB Sims tool to see some of the best ways to approach this slate. Now, for the purposes of this video, I created 2,000 lineups in Fantasy Cruncher. I made them all be 5-man stacks. I didn't force any secondary stacks. If you're using this tool on your own, you probably will want to do that to mimic the field a little bit better. But for the sake of time, and because this is an early video and things are going to change one way or the other, I just went ahead and crunched all 5-man stacks here, crunched 2,000 of them and simulated them. I used my own projections. So if the slate started right now, this is pretty much in line with what I would be doing. Obviously, things are going to change. Lineups come out, ownership projections change. Things can be different, but this video is intended to give you a look at how you can use this tool if you're looking to use it on your own. And if you are, there will be a link below this video wherever you're watching it, whether it's YouTube or Twitter, with a sign-up link. We have weekly pricing, we have monthly pricing, whatever works better for you. You can use that link if you're trying to use this for your own lineups. So we're going to show you some different ways that you can use it and different things, different information you can find out from it. But also, it is an early look. Again, things are going to change, but gives you a look at how the slate looks right now at 2 o'clock in the afternoon, give or take. So starting with the lineups that simulated to the top, one thing that stands out immediately is that we do actually have some different teams as the primary 5-man stack. So that tells us that this isn't a slate necessarily where you have one or two teams running away with it. You don't have a team in Coors Field. You don't have any teams with implied run totals, a run and a half higher than anybody else. We have a slate where there's not a ton of good pitching and there's a lot of really good hitting conditions, whether it's because of the park that they're playing in or the weather or both. There are a lot of teams, a lot of stacks that look good, and that's reflected in the top, the stacks here. You just see a lot of different teams showing up. So at the top, we have a 5-man Boston Atlanta stack. Boston looks like a very good stack today. They're going up against John Gray, but the game is in Boston. They have about a 5 implied run total. We have 2 Atlanta Braves alongside them. The Braves are expensive, so they're going to be a difficult team to full 5-man stack, and that's why you're not seeing a lot of Atlanta 5-mans at the top, but they do have very, very good hitters. They are in a good spot against Quantrill. Saying they have very good hitters is probably the understatement of the century. Really, really good offense. It's just a matter of, can you get to those bats, especially on a slate where pitching, there's not a lot of good cheap pitching. There's not a lot of good pitching in general. So I do expect that we'll see a lot of like 2-man and 3-man Atlanta stacks or, just Atlanta one-offs, more so than full 5-mans because of the pricing. But here we have Pablo Lopez, who does project as the most popular pitcher on the slate. He's very good. He's facing a KC team with a 3.2 implied run total. He projects as the best pitcher on the slate. Brian Bayo as the SP2. Now, there's going to be a lot of this, I think, where not Bayo specifically, but lower owned pitchers in that 8K price range, give or take, because you have a lot of ownership in that range coming into a couple of different arms. Bobby Miller for the Dodgers is projected for about 30%. Seth Lugo for the Padres is projected for about 27%. Alex Cobb and Lance Lynn are each pulling another 15 to 16%. And they should be. All of those guys do project as the best options in that range. But there are a lot of other pitchers like Bayo who are talented enough. They just don't have good matchups or they're in bad parks. There's reasons that they're risky and not projecting quite as well. But from a tournament standpoint, pivoting to those guys at low ownership, especially if you're playing one of the more popular teams, is a pretty solid approach. And that's what we see here. Boston is going to be pretty popular today. Right now, as a stack, we have them projected to be the most popular team in terms of aggregate ownership. So this is the kind of lineup where you'd want to say, I understand Bobby Miller projects better than Bayo, but Bayo is getting 1/10 the ownership. Let's go to him, offset some of the Boston ownership. We have the 5-man Boston stack with Wong, Casas, Hamilton, Devers, and Duran. Very good one-offs with the 2-man with Albies and Acuna. And then you have the Michael Conforto one-off. The Giants are taking on Tommy Malone tonight in San Francisco. So don't know if Conforto will be in the lineup, but if he is, even though it's lefty-lefty, it's not a bad matchup against Malone. Next, we have Minnesota, who is a strong combination of value and upside. We actually have them right now with the highest stack score as they take on Alec Marsh tonight in Minnesota. 5.5% chance of being the top stack, but also an 11% chance of being the top value stack. So you have the 5-man with Kirilloff, Correa, Buxton, Gallo, and Kepler. Tons of power there. Max Muncy, Ozzy Albies, Danny Jansen one-offs. They all look good. We once again have Pablo Lopez. And then we're going to another not very popular SP2 in Patrick Sandoval. He does have a tough matchup tonight against the Padres, but it is one of the few games on the slate that's in a pitcher's park. We've seen Sandoval's strikeout stuff return lately, striking out at least 6 guys in 3 of his last 4, and the only one where he didn't was in Coors Field, so who really cares? Again, it's not that you're going out of your way necessarily to just jam in a bunch of Sandoval, but it is a relatively high upside, inexpensive pitcher that isn't getting ownership. Here we have a Cleveland stack going up against the Braves, so they are taking on Mike Soroka. No idea really what Soroka is at this point. He's been hurt for essentially 4 years. He was good in his last start. He struggled in his first 2. In between, he spent some time at AAA where he was pretty solid. So he's probably a decent pitcher. Cleveland has been below average this year, but they have been bouncing back a bit lately, and that's not too surprising. They're not a great offense, but it was pretty surprising that they were the worst offense in baseball against right-handed pitching for a couple of months. They do have some good individual hitters. This lineup has Ramirez, Rosario, Josh Naylor. Always going to be happy to get to those guys. And then you're saving some money with Will Brennan and Bo Naylor. We have Pablo Lopez once again. And then another low-owned pitcher in Josiah Gray. Not great strikeout stuff, but a 21% strikeout percentage on this slate is still decent. He's taking on the Reds, who we know have a lot of young talent. They've been very good lately. But this game is in Cleveland, so it's a wrong team there. This game's in Washington, so it's not Cincinnati in terms of a great hitter's park. It does still play up power, and it is hot in Washington today, so the ball will probably carry, but very little ownership going into him. So, it's not a safe play, but he's not getting ownership, so there is some appeal there. You can use that to offset, Pablo Lopez's ownership. Another Minnesota stack. Here's a 5-man Atlanta just to kind of see what the rest of it looks like. Here we're not getting the Pablo Lopez. We're going Lynn and Gray, so 2 mid-range pitchers. Olsen, Albies, Harris, Ozuna, and Rosario. So it's also not the most expensive version of the Braves. You don't have Acuna in there. You don't have Riley. You don't have Murphy, but it's still a very high upside stack. Harris and Ozuna and Rosario, about as cheap as you can get on the Braves. They're still north of 4K, but it is a little bit more affordable. And then you have very cheap one-offs with Naylor, Rendon, Hamilton. I think this lineup, it is good. And, obviously it's simulated as our 5th best lineup, but this lineup does also sort of show why I think it's going to be tough to get a lot of full 5-man Atlanta stacks, because this isn't even the best version of Atlanta, and it's still pretty ugly outside of those bats. We got a couple Toronto lineups here against Lynn, another Boston lineup, Cubs showing up a little bit. So let's select the top 150 lineups. You can see here, if you're playing 20 max, you can grab your top 20. You can do pretty much whatever you want over here. You can also manually select lineups by just clicking the hearts. Where I think that really comes into play is, so if you let's say you're playing 150 lineups, you select your top 150, go over here to exposures, see we have 61% Pablo Lopez. For whatever reason, let's say you don't want more than 50% Pablo Lopez. You can go back to here, just scroll down and start unclicking, find the lowest Pablo Lopez lineups. So like this one, unclick that, click the next one that doesn't have Lopez, like this one. So that's how I think the most effective way to manually select lineups is to sort of alter your exposures to get them exactly where you're comfortable, if you're not comfortable with what comes up when you just select the top lineups. But looking at the top 5-man stack exposures, Boston at the top, not too surprising. I had mentioned that they are the most popular team, but this is a big enough slate. They're only getting 9.5% aggregate ownership, and they do have a 5-run total tonight. They're very inexpensive, so you can build good lineups around them as well. Toronto coming in second, tied with the Mets. Toronto is in a weird spot. They have a tough matchup with Lance Lynn, but it's also a very high upside matchup. Lynn has had issues with power this year, particularly to lefties. There's not a lot of lefties on the Blue Jays, but Brandon Belt and Dalton Varsho stand out as 2 of the highest upside value plays on the slate at 3K and 3,300 respectively on DraftKings. And then obviously you still can get the Springer, Bichette, Guerrero, Chapman, Merrifield. Danny Jansen looks like a good value catcher as well. So the Blue Jays are pretty interesting. The Mets also coming in at 14%, 5-man stacks in this sim. Good matchup for them, taking on Tommy Henry tonight with a 4.6 to 4.7 implied run total. They are also relatively inexpensive. Nimmo, Lindor, Alonso, all 4,500 plus on DraftKings. Everybody else is $3,700 or less. There is plenty of power in this lineup, so it makes sense that we're getting to them. Cubs, Minnesota, I mentioned, first in top stack percentage. The Cubs are taking on Adrian Hauser in Milwaukee, so good hitters park. They are about 7th in top stack percentage. So you can see that, we're a little bit flattered on stacks here, but we are still getting over the field on Boston, Toronto, the Mets, a little bit over on the Cubs and Twins as well. From an individual player standpoint, Pablo Lopez coming in at 61%. He's projected for 50% ownership, so a little over the field, but nothing too crazy there. He just projects as the best pitcher option. He's facing Kansas City. They have a 3.2 implied run total. He has one of the best strikeout percentages on the slate. It's just a good spot for Lopez. We're getting to a lot of gray, well over the field on him. Don't love that, honestly. I understand why it's happening. I talked about it when we were looking at the lineups. Grabbing some of these low-owned 8K, give or take guys does make sense within individual lineups. I don't necessarily know that I want it to just be Josiah Gray constantly, as opposed to kind of mixing that up with some of the other arms. But he's the guy showing up with, in this sim. And if that's how it works out for me, that's how it works out. Wouldn't mind if later in the day, that's 15% and it's redistributed elsewhere. But Lance Lynn coming in about double the field as well. Scary matchup against the Blue Jays, but he is only $8,400. He has a good strikeout upside. And again, there's just not a lot of really good pitching on this slate. Then we start getting to our bats. Jaron Duran, Rafael Devers, top two. No real surprise there. 22% and 21% owned. Acuna, 20%. So sort of like I mentioned before, it's tough to get to full 5-man Atlanta stacks. We only got in this sim to 3% of them, but from an individual hitter standpoint, you're still looking to get to Acuna. We have another Boston bat here. Bobby Miller coming in at about half the field. So Miller is one of the guys where, the more you're getting to Josiah Gray types, whether it's Josiah Gray specifically or not, it's probably cutting back your exposure to Bobby Miller a bit. He projects as the most popular guy in that range, and he should. He's a good enough young pitcher, 21 to 22% strikeout percentage in a pretty good matchup against the Pirates, but he's not that much better than the field in that range that you can't afford to just, throw some darts at other guys. Danny Jansen, good value play, as I mentioned. Jose Ramirez, you're always going to be happy to get to. And then we start getting some of the Mets value with Pham and Alvarez. Looking specifically at the pitchers to see what else we have going on there. We already talked about Lopez, Gray, Lynn, and Miller. Alec Marsh, 5K. Good strikeout matchup against the Twins. Doesn't project to be particularly good at the major league level. Doesn't project to be terrible, though. So at 5K, I think that makes a little bit of sense. Brian Bayo is very similar to Josiah Gray. He's a better pitcher than Gray. Really good strikeout percentage, better strikeout stuff, but he is facing the Rangers. You'll see here we are quite a bit under the field on Seth Lugo. Again, it's basically suggesting that one of the most profitable places to pivot is that SP2, where you're getting a lot of ownership coming into good but not great pitchers like Bobby Miller. It's kind of saying, okay, well, we want to get to some of these popular bats. We like these popular offenses. Let's just play some Bayo, play some Josiah Gray, play some of those guys, cut back on the Seth Lugo, cut back on the Bobby Miller, and hope that variance essentially works in our favor. Then you're getting some Sandoval under the field on Alex Cobb, another popular pitcher in that price range. So pretty interesting to see what we're doing with the SP2s here. The stack exposures look good. The SP2s look a lot less comfortable, but that's just going to happen on slates like this where you don't have a lot of good pitching. Looking at individual player ROI. So this isn't necessarily telling you the best plays overall, but it is telling you the players that the hitters or the players that are showing up in the lineups that have the highest simulated ROIs rather. So Kirilloff and Kepler, cheap pieces from Minnesota, makes a ton of sense. Josiah Gray helps explain why he's in so many of our lineups. Lance Lynn as well. Then you're getting back to these Minnesota power bats from a stack ROI standpoint. The 5-man stacks, Minnesota standing out a lot. Everything else, pretty much even or a little bit below, but you can, walk through all this stuff and sort of draw your own conclusions from that. So that's all I have for you here. It looks like a slate where we're probably going to take some risks on SP2, and there's a lot of good hitting options to choose from. Should be a pretty fun one to make lineups. Thanks for checking out the video. Hit the thumbs up button on YouTube. Hit the heart button on Twitter. That helps us out quite a bit. And if you are looking to use this tool for your own lineups, help yourself improve your DFS game, check out the link below this video. Thanks again for watching. Hope you enjoyed it, and good luck on your lineups.